We're just getting some more legal news in today. It's another big win here for the Trump administration on the legal side of things, as a judge has ruled that the administration's sweeping firings that have been taking place in the federal workforce can continue as Doge and Elon Musk eye more cuts. So let's bring our panel in on this. Seth Berenzweig, a business compliance and constitutional law attorney. Brian Claypool joins as well, criminal defense attorney. I think, Brian, this is like 3 in the last few days. At first, the story was the administration was being checked by the courts, but now they're winning some of these in the courts. What do you make of it?
Hey, Connell, great to be back with you. Yeah, if you could break down the 3 areas that Trump is trying to really litigate in the courts, it's the immigration, which was the citizenship, birthright citizenship, and then you've got the transgender, and then the third one you're talking about is Trump overseeing the bureaucracy, right? He wants to be able to determine who works in certain agencies and who gets fired. And I think the courts are coming down in his favor because ultimately, Connell, if this gets to the U.S. Supreme Court, I think Trump is likely to prevail on this because basically what he's doing is he's giving directive to agencies, and his argument is going to be, look, I can't carry out our agenda without some oversight of these departments, Department of Justice, IRS, for example, because think about it. I mean, he's like the CEO of our country, and if he can't have any input on who works at certain agencies, how is he going to be able to carry out his agenda?
Okay, Seth, how do you see the legal arguments on this? Because, you know, it seems the judge says, all right, to Brian's point, you can do this. You can keep moving with cutting back on the federal workforce in this particular case. How do you see it?
Well, I think this week has been a historic pivot point. There was some bumps in the road and some turbulence in terms of some of these rulings. However, within the last 48 hours, Judge Chutkan in the federal court here in Washington, D.C., ruled favorably for the Trump administration, both as to Doge access to records and terminations of employees at 7 federal agencies. Judge Cooper here in Washington just ruled similarly, supporting Doge and terminations from another court here in Washington, D.C. We're waiting for a similar big ruling from a United States District Court in Washington. I agree that if this goes to the Supreme Court in a very way, may will, that it really will be in favor of the president. For example, if you just look at it from a basic separation of powers principle under the Constitution, the president has the absolute authority to appoint Doge to go in and take a look at these elements and to manage the federal workforce. The presidential history here in Washington is littered with examples of failed attempts, but now Doge has finally burst through the bureaucratic bubble. This is what the election was in part about. These are successful, and I think that we're really witnessing a historic pivot on these critical cases that are happening during this very week.
But the end game, you wonder, Seth, is the end result of all of this, with today's ruling coupled with some of the things Brian's talking about, just a more powerful executive at the end of this.
The Supreme Court, through its recent rulings, has been very supportive of aggregating continued authority and power in the presidency of the United States. They've provided that in a number of decisions recently, and now this groundswell of decisions that are supportive of Doge, where they're finally putting in transparency and accountability, is the perfect signature mark to go to the Supreme Court. If and when it does, this is going to simply continue a trend that has already been happening here in Washington. They will support the president's ability. He is saving taxpayer funds. This is the first successful attempt in decades to be able to do so. This is in part why he won the election, and this is well within his plenary authority as the chief executive of the United States.
Thank you, Seth, and thank you, Brian.